Stoic actions to build a worth-living life. There is a quiet kind of suffering no one sees. It doesn't scream. It doesn't break things. It doesn't call attention to itself. It just sits beneath your skin, like fog inside the mind, like noise that never stops. You wake up with it. You go to sleep with it. And no one really notices because you're still functioning. You're still doing the things. But inside, you're tired. Not physically, but mentally. Tired of yourself, tired of the pace, tired of not knowing what exactly you're chasing. And maybe what hurts most isn't that life is hard, it's that it feels so scattered, so full of movement, but empty of meaning. You get things done, but nothing feels done. You meet deadlines, but miss your own soul. You appear calm, but the mind never stops spinning. If any of that feels familiar, this message is not content. It is a mirror. A moment to stop running, to see clearly, and to build again. Because a life worth living is not made of constant ambition or applause. It's not built through pressure or praise. It is built through intention. Slow, quiet, disciplined intention. And Stoicism is not here to make you feel invincible. It's here to help you feel stable, present, capable of facing what is real, and letting go of what is not. This is not theory. What follows are actions. 8 specifically, none, and in truth more than 8. Because your life doesn't change through knowledge. It changes through practice. Through deliberate choices made in silence. Through the moments no one sees, when you choose order over chaos, discipline over impulse, clarity over confusion. These Stoic actions are not from another time. They are for this time, want for people like you with too many tabs open in the mind, with emotional fires that keep relighting, with a quiet hope that life can feel different, even if they don't know how yet. You won't hear anything loud in this message. There's no shouting, no promises of instant change. Just a voice, steady and calm, speaking to the part of you that's still listening beneath the noise, the part that's tired of drifting, the part that wants to rebuild from the inside out. And so we begin not with a motivational speech, but with an observation, one that Stoicism has echoed for thousands of years, and that your own soul may already know. A restless mind is not a powerful one, it is an exhausted one. And until you quiet what is unnecessary, you won't hear what truly matters. Let's begin. The hidden poverty of a restless mind. Restlessness is often mistaken for drive. The constant movement, the full calendar, the endless thoughts, they look like ambition from the outside. But inside, something feels off. It's not that you're doing too little. It's that you're doing too much without ever feeling complete. There's no finish line, just another task, another notification, another distraction. And underneath it all, a quiet truth begins to surface. You're not living. You're escaping. The Stoics warned us about this. They didn't have smartphones, but they knew what it meant to be scattered, to be constantly pulled away from yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote about being torn by desire for the next thing, as if the present were never enough. And he was an emperor. So what excuse do we have? A restless mind is not a badge of progress. It's a sign of inner poverty. Because when the soul is full, it doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. It doesn't need more to feel enough. But when it's empty, no amount of doing can satisfy. You chase one thing, then another, hoping that somewhere along the way you'll find peace, only to discover you've traded your attention for exhaustion. Real clarity begins with this question. What exactly are you running from? And what would happen if you stopped? Most people fear silence because in silence they meet themselves. And for some, that's unbearable. The noise is easier. It keeps the harder truths away. But silence is where the soul recalibrates, where wisdom speaks softly, and where the mind remembers its original rhythm, one thought at a time, one breath at a time. To build a life worth living, you must learn to leave the marketplace of the mind. You must reclaim your attention as if it were your most valuable possession, because it is. Every distraction you allow is a withdrawal from your mental bank. Every urge to scroll, escape, or multitask without intention is a small theft of your peace. Epictetus said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life, and nothing enslaves more quietly than a restless mind pretending to be productive." Stillness is not weakness. It's not laziness. It's not passive. It is a deliberate act of defiance against the world's demand to be constantly reachable, constantly stimulated, constantly overwhelmed. You don't need more motivation. You need fewer mental leaks. You need to patch the holes in your attention before trying to swim faster. Because speed without direction is just chaos with momentum. Begin with 5 minutes. No phone. No noise. No agenda. Just the breath, the moment, the awareness of being alive. And if even that feels difficult, good. That's where the work begins. That's where the mind has to learn. There is nothing to fear in stillness. In fact, it may be the only place where truth still lives. And when you quiet the noise long enough, something strange happens. You start to hear your own wisdom again, the part of you that doesn't need to prove anything, impress anyone, or escape everything. The part that just is, calm, clear, aware. This is not about isolation. It's about reorientation. The world can still move. Let it. But you must learn to be still in motion, to be unmoved by what doesn't matter, to act only when it is time, and to rest without guilt. Only then can you begin to build not just a busy life, but a worthy one. Silence is a strategy, not an absence. Most people fear silence not because it's empty, but because it's full. Full of thoughts they've buried, full of questions they've ignored, full of truths that convenience taught them to postpone. And so they keep the music on, the podcast running, the feed scrolling, not to learn, but to stay distracted. But silence is not a void. It is a mirror, and in Stoicism it is also a weapon, not of violence but of precision, because the one who has mastered silence does not react to life. He chooses when to respond. And that, in a chaotic world, is power. Modern culture tells you to speak quickly, to have a take, to respond now. But the Stoic holds his words until they are necessary. He pauses, not because he is unsure, but because he is sovereign over his impulses. When others feel urgency, he feels time expand. He doesn't speak to fill space. He speaks to bring clarity. There's a reason why Epictetus said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." But this isn't just about conversation, it's about life. You don't need to insert yourself into every problem, every argument, every moment. Silence, when chosen with awareness, is not passivity. It is presence without performance. Stillness sharpens perception. When you're silent, you start to notice the tone under the words, the emotion behind the question, the lie hiding inside the compliment. You see more because you're not filling the space with your own noise. And silence protects you. It gives you a shield against regret. How many wounds have been self-inflicted through words said in heat? How many relationships cracked because silence wasn't practiced first? The Stoic learns this early. Words are irreversible. Reactions once expressed cannot be recalled. But silence holds the line until wisdom is ready to speak. There's also another kind of silence, deeper still, the kind that sits with pain without solving it, that watches a storm in the soul without rushing to escape it. Most people panic when they feel that kind of silence. But the Stoic breathes. He knows storms don't last, and more importantly, he knows they reveal. They reveal what still owns you, what still triggers you, what still lives inside unhealed. This kind of silence doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing less of the wrong thing so you can hear what actually matters. It means subtracting the noise long enough for wisdom to surface. Let others react. Let them post. Let them argue. Your calm will unsettle them more than your words ever could. And when you finally speak, let it be with the weight of someone who could have remained silent but chose not to. Silence, when chosen with intention, becomes a form of strength. It is not empty. It is full of your own awareness, sharpened like a blade, waiting for the moment that requires it. The courage to live unseen. There is a kind of hunger that doesn't begin in the stomach. It's quieter, more subtle. A hunger for attention, for validation, for being witnessed. It's the desire to be applauded, liked, followed, not always out of pride, but often from a deep confusion. The belief that something isn't real until others recognize it. But what if the most important things you ever do, the most noble, most disciplined, most transformative, are never seen? The Stoic doesn't need an audience to live well. In fact, he resists one. Because the presence of applause often distorts intention. It turns practice into performance. It replaces quiet discipline with theatrical displays of virtue. And so the Stoic learns, not everything that is good needs to be visible. Not every worthy act needs praise. Marcus Aurelius wrote daily to himself, not to be remembered but to be honest. His reflections weren't content, they were clarity. He lived surrounded by noise, by politics, by war, and still, he sought solitude within his own mind. Because he knew that real strength doesn't shine under spotlights, it holds steady in silence. To live unseen is not to hide. It is to stop depending on being noticed. When you detach your actions from recognition, something remarkable happens. You begin to live in alignment. You begin to do things because they are right, not because they are rewarded. This kind of life requires courage. It means making choices without validation. It means continuing the work when no one claps. It means letting others chase visibility while you pursue integrity. And it means allowing your peace to come from being in harmony with your values, not with opinions. Epictetus reminded us that if we want to be free, we must stop letting others define success. Stop letting others decide if what you're doing is worthwhile. You will not build a worthy life by waiting for others to confirm it. In a world addicted to exposure, privacy becomes a form of power. Not secrecy, but sacredness. You protect what is valuable. You don't put your soul on display just to prove it's real. So let others post their highlight reels. Let them showcase their discipline, their joy, their plans. You focus on living, quietly, deeply, truthfully. Let your presence speak through your steadiness, not your self-promotion. The fruits of this path are not loud, but they are lasting. Peace that doesn't depend on praise. Identity that doesn't collapse in silence. A way of being that isn't swayed by who's watching or who isn't. To live unseen is not to live less. It is to finally live free. The art of holding the line. There are days when you feel pulled in every direction. The demands pile up. The emotions surge. And your mind begins to blur the line between what matters and what merely screams louder. It's in these moments that most people break their rhythm, abandon their principles, and react instead of choosing. But the Stoic learns a different way. A quieter strength. A posture of inward resistance, not against the world, but against the temptation to betray yourself when life feels heavy. This is the art of holding the line. Discipline is not punishment. It is protection. It is the inner architecture that keeps your values upright when everything outside leans toward collapse. The modern world overvalues motivation, quick energy, emotional highs, short-term momentum. But motivation is a visitor. Discipline is a resident. It stays when the mood leaves. To hold the line is to stay aligned when no one is watching. To repeat the small, necessary acts that build stability. To get up when you don't feel like it. To say no when everything inside wants to escape. To follow through not because it's easy, but because you said you would. That's where integrity is forged, not in your feelings, but in your follow-through. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and often, it is not the weight of life that breaks us, but our panic under its pressure. Discipline steadies the hands. It calms the inner storm. It reminds you, this is hard, yes, but it is not beyond you. You don't need to conquer the future. You only need to hold the present moment with care. And discipline does not mean rigidity. It doesn't mean forcing yourself through exhaustion or ignoring your limits. It means moving with rhythm instead of impulse. It means deciding once, and then honoring that decision 100 quiet times. To build a life worth living, you must become reliable to yourself. If your peace depends on external conditions, it will collapse with the first storm. But if your peace is guarded by discipline, it becomes unshakable. It doesn't mean you won't feel overwhelmed. It means overwhelm no longer owns your behavior. This is not dramatic. It's not romantic. It won't get applause. But it's sacred, because every time you choose order over chaos just once more, you reclaim a part of your mind. You lay another stone in the foundation of a life not ruled by mood or distraction, but by intention. And yes, you will fail sometimes. You'll fall short. But the line is always there, waiting to be held again. That's the beauty of this practice. You're not meant to be perfect. You're meant to be faithful, to show up again, to begin again. And each time you do, you deepen the roots of your self-respect. A worthy life isn't loud, it's consistent. And consistency begins with one quiet act, holding the line. What you refuse to feel will rule you. There is a quiet cost to emotional avoidance. You may not see it in the moment, but it gathers over time. In tension you can't explain, in overreactions that surprise you, in the fatigue of holding in what was never meant to stay locked away. Most people think ignoring a feeling makes them stronger, but the Stoic knows, what you refuse to feel doesn't disappear, it hides, and from the shadows, it steers your life. Stoicism is often misunderstood as suppression, as if wisdom means never feeling deeply. But that is not strength. That is denial dressed as control. Real Stoicism doesn't teach you to ignore your emotions. It teaches you to understand them, to face them with honesty, and to rule them not by force, but by clarity. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But what if the mind itself becomes the battlefield? What if your thoughts are distorted by emotions you won't name? Then the first act of power is awareness. You don't need to fight your anger, your grief, your fear. You need to see them, to trace them to their root. Most emotions aren't enemies. They are messengers. They arise when something inside you is being neglected, violated, or misunderstood. And if you bury them, you lose the chance to learn from them. The Stoic meets his emotions like a disciplined soldier, not with panic, not with indulgence, but with readiness. He watches, he listens, and then he chooses how to respond. He doesn't obey every feeling, but neither does he pretend they don't exist. Because repressed emotion becomes reaction. It leaks into your tone, your decisions, your body. It becomes the impatience in your voice, the tension in your chest, the distraction in your work. And the danger is not in the feeling itself, but in letting it steer the ship while you pretend you're still in control. To live well, you must create space to feel, quietly, deliberately, without judgment. Sit with discomfort until it becomes familiar. Name what you feel without shame. Let the emotion rise, and just as naturally, let it pass, because all emotions are temporary unless you resist them. That's when they linger. That's when they rule. You do not have to be afraid of what you feel. You only have to be honest. The Stoic is not numb. He is present, fully alive, fully aware, fully grounded in what is, even when it hurts. You cannot build peace on top of suppression. You must begin with truth. And the truth is, emotion, when welcomed, becomes insight. But when rejected, it becomes sabotage. So the next time you feel something rise, don't run, don't shrink, don't fight. Just pause, breathe, and ask, what is this feeling trying to teach me? What am I avoiding that must now be faced? Because whatever you refuse to feel will quietly, invisibly begin to rule you. Small discomforts, big liberation. Comfort is seductive. It whispers promises of ease, safety, and reward without effort. But beneath its softness, something begins to decay. Clarity fades. Discipline weakens, the will shrinks. And soon, you're not choosing comfort, you're depending on it. That's when it becomes a trap. The Stoics practiced discomfort not to suffer, but to strengthen, not because they lacked luxury, but because they refused to become its slave. Seneca was known to sleep on hard ground, eat plain food, wear rough clothes, not out of deprivation, but out of wisdom. He knew that voluntary hardship builds the kind of resilience that no crisis can take away. Modern life makes this harder. Comfort is everywhere and it is worshipped. Warm showers, fast delivery, endless scrolling, everything convenient, everything instant. But comfort at all costs becomes dependence, and dependence breeds fragility. You begin to fear discomfort because you never face it, and what you fear will quietly control you. So the Stoic chooses discomfort, intentionally, strategically. He introduces friction into his life, not as punishment, but as preparation. Because when you meet hardship on your terms, life's unexpected trials no longer undo you. You've trained for them. This is not about rejecting comfort altogether. It's about reclaiming agency. It's about building a nervous system that doesn't collapse at the first sign of inconvenience. It's about being able to sit in hunger for a while without panicking, to delay gratification without misery, to face discomfort without complaint. Small discomforts are not just practice, they are proof. They reveal who's in charge, you or your impulses. The craving for sugar, the urge to scroll, the need to always be entertained. These are not harmless habits. They are negotiations with your strength. And every time you give in, you train the mind to believe comfort is necessary for peace. But the Stoic discovers something different, that the mind becomes sharper in discomfort, that silence becomes clearer, that gratitude multiplies, that peace expands, not through abundance but through the removal of need. Try it. Wake earlier than you want to. Take the cold shower, fast for a morning. Walk without headphones. Leave the phone at home. Do one small thing today that reminds your body it doesn't command your spirit, that your peace is not tied to ease. Because with every small discomfort embraced, you earn back a part of your freedom. You build a quiet confidence that nothing external owns you. And that is what Stoicism promises. Not a life of suffering, but a life of strength. A mind that stands even when the world shakes. Liberation doesn't come from avoiding what's hard. It comes from moving toward it, with eyes open, heart steady, and mind awake. Audit your inputs, repair your mind. Your thoughts don't emerge from nowhere. They are shaped, carved by what you consume, what you allow in, what you let surround you without question. If your mind feels clouded, anxious, or unfocused, the first thing to examine isn't your willpower. It's your environment, your inputs. What are you feeding your mind every day? The Stoics understood this long before algorithms were invented. They spoke of protecting your hegemonicon, the ruling faculty, the core of your inner command center. If that becomes polluted, confused, or overstimulated, then even the best advice won't land. Wisdom requires a clear vessel, and clarity comes from curation. In a world where attention is currency, you are always being influenced by the scroll, the soundbite, the headline, the half-truth. You are constantly absorbing the energy, fears, opinions, and chaos of others, unless you learn to filter. Most people try to fix their mind without fixing what's entering it. That's like drying a floor with the faucet still running. You must become a curator of your own mental ecosystem. This isn't about arrogance or isolation. It's about clarity. Who do you listen to? What do you watch? What kinds of conversations surround you? What images, words, and beliefs are constantly repeated around your attention? Seneca warned about the company we keep. Not only physical company, but the company of ideas. He advised us to be slow to trust the influence of the crowd. And yet today, most of what we think is borrowed. From people we've never met, from voices we didn't ask for, from noise we didn't choose. The Stoic doesn't block the world. He filters it. He trains the mind to notice what sharpens him and what dulls him, what uplifts and what inflames, what brings truth and what spreads confusion. And then, he makes quiet adjustments, small subtractions that restore mental clarity. Try this. Begin noticing how you feel after consuming something. A video, a conversation, a scroll session. Do you feel clearer or more distracted? Energized or depleted? Grounded or scattered? Don't overthink it, just observe. And then reduce what drains, double what restores. Because your attention is not infinite. Every careless input comes with a cost. You trade focus for noise, peace for stimulation, wisdom for volume. And that trade, repeated daily, becomes your mental state. But the mind is repairable. And it doesn't take a complete overhaul. It starts with one change, one filter added, one voice silenced, one space reclaimed from noise. The Stoic trains not only to think better, but to think less about what doesn't matter. And that begins not with control, but with curation. Audit your inputs. Your mind will follow. Burn the scripts you didn't write. Much of what you believe about yourself did not begin with you. It was handed to you by parents, teachers, culture, algorithms, timelines, expectations you never agreed to but somehow obeyed. The roles you play, the identity you defend, the image you curate. These were formed before you ever had the power to question them, but now you do. A life worth living demands authorship, and authorship begins by asking, whose voice is this in my head? Is this truly my belief, my value, my vision? Or is it a script I've memorized to survive? The Stoic knows that borrowed identities create hidden suffering. When your life is built on others' expectations, even your successes feel hollow. You meet goals that were never yours. You wear titles that don't fit. And worst of all, you forget who you were before the world told you who to be. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The approval of those who cannot even approve themselves, why should you value it?" Yet how many decisions are made from that place? The fear of disappointing others, the pressure to conform, the need to prove your worth through roles you never chose. The Stoic doesn't rebel for rebellion's sake. He simply begins the quiet work of returning to what is real. He strips away what was inherited, what was expected, what was never examined. And in that process, something strange happens. Peace begins to return. Not because life becomes easier, but because it becomes yours. This is not about abandoning responsibility. It's about refusing to perform a version of yourself just to be accepted. It's about stepping out of the story written for you and beginning to write one that is aligned with your principles, your awareness, your reasoned choice. Burning the script doesn't mean erasing your past. It means stopping the repetition of what no longer fits. You don't have to keep pretending to enjoy the life that was never yours. You don't have to keep saying yes when your soul says no. You don't have to keep running on a track that leads to someone else's idea of success. The Stoic path is not self-centered. It is self-honest. It asks you to live in harmony with nature, and your nature is not obligation. It is purpose. Purpose that arises not from pressure but from awareness. From seeing clearly what matters to you, not just what impresses others. This is where courage is needed most. Not in public acts of defiance, but in the quiet, invisible decision to reclaim authorship. To say, I am no longer an actor in someone else's play. I will be the author of my days, the sculptor of my time, the ruler of my own inner world. You owe no one a version of yourself that costs you your peace. Burn the scripts. Write your own. Let go before it's taken. There is a silent grief in holding on too tightly, not because loss is wrong, but because resistance makes it heavier than it has to be. Most suffering doesn't come from what leaves our lives. It comes from the fear of its departure, from the clutching, the pleading, the refusal to release. And yet, the Stoic knows, everything you love is borrowed. Nothing belongs to you. Not your titles, not your health, not your relationships. not your possessions. You are not the owner of what you treasure. You are its temporary steward. And the moment you forget that, you begin to suffer in advance. This is not about indifference. It's about clarity. The Stoic loves deeply, but without possession. He holds what he has with open hands, not clenched fists. Because he has trained his mind to understand what others avoid, that everything external is subject to change, and what you refuse to let go of willingly will eventually be torn away. Epictetus taught that, when you kiss your child, your wife, say that you are kissing a mortal. Not to dampen love, but to awaken presence, to heighten appreciation, to make you more fully here, precisely because you know this moment will not last. Letting go doesn't mean caring less. It means caring better. When you stop grasping, you stop distorting. You stop trying to freeze what is meant to move, and you begin to live in flow with nature, accepting its cycles, trusting its rhythm, welcoming what is and releasing what no longer is. There is a freedom that only arrives when you surrender, not in defeat, but in wisdom. A kind of lightness, a mental untangling, a sense that even if life changes, you will remain, not because you are untouched, but because you are unattached to what cannot be controlled. The Stoic doesn't run from love, achievement, or beauty, but he knows they are not the source of his peace. They are gifts, not guarantees, and so he honors them while they are present and releases them when they pass, just as he would exhale after the inhale. Try this. Look at one thing in your life right now, a role, a possession, a plan, and imagine it leaving. Don't dramatize it. Just imagine its absence. Then ask, would I still be me? Would I still be capable, alive, grounded? And if the answer feels shaky, then that is where your work begins. Because anything you feel you cannot lose is something you've made bigger than yourself. And anything bigger than yourself will eventually break you. Letting go is not weakness. It is the practice of peace. It is the act of building strength not on what stays, but on your ability to remain whole even when things leave. So let go before it's taken. You will hurt less. You will see more. And in that space of release, you may finally understand what it means to be free. Your mood is not your master. Feelings are real, but not all of them are reliable. Moods shift like weather, sudden, unpredictable, and often misleading. 1 hour you feel focused, steady, capable. The next, without warning, you're irritable, reactive, uncertain. Most people live according to these shifts, mistaking them for truth. But the Stoic sees them for what they are, temporary visitors, not permanent guides. You are not your mood. You are the observer of your mood. And once you learn to create that space, that brief distance between feeling and action, you regain control of your life. The world tells you to follow your feelings, but feelings don't always lead where you want to go. They fluctuate with hormones, with fatigue, with what you ate, with who texted you last. If you build your actions around how you feel in the moment, you surrender your life to instability. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, you don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you. That is the posture of the Stoic. Calm, observant, curious, not consumed. This is not emotional suppression. It is emotional governance. The Stoic doesn't reject sadness, anger, or fear. He welcomes them with awareness. He lets them pass through, not take the throne. You may wake up low. Fine. You may feel restless, unsure, flat. Fine. But that doesn't change what needs to be done. Your mood does not dictate your values. It doesn't determine your behavior. You don't wait to feel like showing up. You show up, and often the feeling follows. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the fog stays. But you move anyway. Not because you're pretending to be fine, but because you refuse to let transience rule permanence. You do not need to justify every emotional shift. You don't need to believe every thought born from fatigue or anxiety. The Stoic knows, not everything that arises deserves to be obeyed. This is how inner strength is built, not through emotional perfection, but through emotional honesty. by watching yourself without rushing to fix or dramatize, by saying, I feel this, but I am not this. I acknowledge it, but I will not serve it. Practice stillness in the presence of inner noise. Let the mood come and go like weather over the sea. Your job is not to control it. Your job is to steer anyway. Because the more you act in alignment with your principles instead of your moods, the more you train your nervous system to follow intention, not impulse. The less power emotion has over your time, your words, your peace. This is not easy, but it is freeing. And over time, your emotions will begin to trust you, because you no longer abandon yourself to them. Moods may visit, but they are not in command. Forgive reality for being real. There is a subtle war many people fight each day, not with others, but with life itself. A war against how things are, against delays, discomforts, losses, limitations. The Stoic sees this clearly. Much of human suffering does not come from the event, but from the resistance to it, the refusal to accept reality on its own terms. You can waste a lifetime wishing things were different, wishing people acted how you expected, wishing outcomes matched your effort. But wishing changes nothing. And worse, it keeps you in a constant state of conflict with what is. Reality is not your enemy. It is your training ground. To forgive reality means to stop demanding that life be easy, fair, or comfortable. It means releasing the invisible script that says, this shouldn't be happening. Because once you remove that belief, you remove the poison of suffering layered on top of pain. The Stoics didn't deny hardship. They prepared for it. They practiced premeditatio malorum, visualizing the worst, not to live in fear, but to anchor themselves in readiness. When things went wrong, they didn't say, why me? They said, why not me? They had already met this moment in the mind. And so they entered it with steadiness. Forgiveness in this context is not emotional weakness. It is philosophical strength. You forgive the rain for falling, the body for aging, the stranger for misunderstanding, the world for not catering to your preference. Because you understand, this is how life is, and peace begins when you stop requiring it to be otherwise. This doesn't mean apathy. It doesn't mean surrendering your standards or dreams. It means acting from clarity, not complaint. Fighting only the battles that are within your control. Working to change what can be changed, without bitterness toward what can't. You become free when you stop needing the world to cooperate with your mood, when you stop dragging your expectations through every interaction, hoping reality will adjust. It won't, but you can. And that, Epictetus reminds us, is where your power lives. Ask yourself, what part of life am I still fighting in secret? What have I silently resented because it didn't go the way I hoped? What weight am I still carrying? Not because it's heavy, but because I won't put it down. The Stoic chooses serenity, not by force, but by alignment, with the nature of things, with the way life unfolds, with the cycles, the seasons, the setbacks, not as punishments, but as parts of a whole. You do not need to love every moment, but you can stop being at war with it. You can meet what is real with a steady heart. You can breathe through the storm and say, this too is life, and I am still here, and I will continue, not bitter, but grounded. Forgive reality. It was never meant to obey you, but it can still teach you, shape you, and free you, if you stop demanding it be different. Choose what hurts now versus what hurts later. There are two kinds of pain in life, the pain of discipline and the pain of regret. One is sharp, immediate, chosen. The other is slow, dull, and accumulates over time. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid pain altogether, and in doing so, they choose the second kind by default. The Stoic sees this clearly. He doesn't seek suffering, but he respects it, because he understands a hard truth. You cannot escape pain. You can only decide which one to carry. Discipline hurts. Waking early. Saying no. Delaying gratification. Speaking truth when silence would be easier. holding the line when compromise whispers seductively. It's uncomfortable, but it's honest. And that discomfort pays dividends, in peace, in strength, in a life that remains upright when others collapse. Regret hurts more, not because it's more intense, but because it comes with a voice. The voice that says, "You knew better. You could have chosen differently. You had the chance and you waited." This pain lasts longer because it isn't just about what happened. It's about what didn't. Seneca wrote, "It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult." And often we avoid the pain of the present moment only to make our future heavier. When you skip the workout, the body weakens. When you avoid the difficult conversation, the relationship fractures. When you chase comfort in every decision, your mind becomes fragile, and reality feels cruel, though it's only ever been honest. The Stoic lives with intention. He chooses short-term friction to avoid long-term damage. He delays pleasure not out of asceticism, but because he understands cost. He sees time as investment, not indulgence, and he would rather suffer a little now than carry unnecessary weight later. This is not about punishing yourself. It's about honoring your future self. Every small act of discipline is an act of love toward the person you are becoming, and every avoidance is a quiet betrayal. The question isn't whether life will bring pain. It will. The question is whether the pain you face will serve your growth or your avoidance. Ask yourself, what am I putting off today that will only grow heavier tomorrow? What discomfort am I refusing now that will return in the form of consequence? You don't need to be perfect. You only need to be honest and brave enough to make the harder choice while it's still small. Choose the pain that clarifies, not the one that corrodes. Choose the tension that leads to truth, not the silence that leads to decay. Choose what hurts now for the sake of what heals later. The worthy life is not free of difficulty. It is full of chosen difficulty, the kind that transforms, sharpens, and frees. Build a rhythm, not a cage. Discipline without rhythm becomes rigidity. Routine without reflection becomes ritual. Many pursue structure as a form of control, a way to force peace into their lives. But the Stoic knows that peace isn't forced, it's cultivated. And what cultivates it best is not a strict schedule, but a steady rhythm. A rhythm respects flow. It honors variation. It allows space for life's unexpected movements and without collapsing. Unlike perfectionism, rhythm doesn't break when you miss a step. It bends, it adapts, then it returns. That's what makes it sustainable. Most people either fall into chaos or fall into obsession. One burns their time, the other burns their joy. The Stoic chooses the middle path. He creates a rhythm not to control time but to align with it, to move in harmony with what matters, while remaining grounded through what doesn't. Marcus Aurelius wrote often about the importance of doing the work of a human being. Wake, reflect, act, serve, rest. He returned to these anchors not because they were glamorous, but because they reminded him who he was. That's the power of rhythm. It keeps you close to your essence, even when the world tries to scatter your mind. Ask yourself, is your day shaped by intention or by momentum? Do you wake with direction, or are you dragged by habits you didn't choose? To build a rhythm is to mark what is essential and return to it again and again, like breath. It may be morning reflection, midday silence, evening writing, a short walk before work, small grounding acts that form the architecture of a calm life. But a rhythm is not a cage. If one morning you rise late or the plan shifts, you don't collapse. You return, you adjust. You remain faithful to the principle, not the performance. This is where peace is built, not in perfect days, but in the quiet repetition of chosen actions. Not out of guilt, but out of alignment. Because every time you honor your rhythm, you remind your mind, I know what I value. I know how I move. I will not be rushed by the chaos around me. Let go of the obsession with control. Build steadiness instead. Let your days breathe, but keep them rooted. Let your tasks shift, but keep your values steady. And let your structure serve your soul, not the other way around. A worthy life is not crammed full. It is deeply paced. And your rhythm, once found, becomes the music your mind learns to trust. The worthy life is quietly built, not loudly announced. You won't find it in applause. Not in the spotlight, not in titles, not in metrics that impress, but never fulfill. A life worth living doesn't need to be proven. It needs to be lived. Quietly, steadily, with presence, with depth. Most of the world is chasing visibility, to be seen, admired, approved. And yet, those who are truly at peace are almost invisible. Not because they hide, but because they no longer need to be validated. Their lives are not performances, they are practices. And that changes everything. The Stoic doesn't build his life to be noticed. He builds it to be anchored in values, in reason, in daily discipline. He knows that inner peace is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It simply radiates through how you move, how you speak, how you choose, especially when no one is watching. Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the most powerful man of his time, still wrote to himself each day, not for legacy, not for image, but to stay aligned, to keep his soul clean, to remember what actually matters. That's the Stoic way. Integrity in the private places, discipline without audience, honor without reward. There is strength in choosing obscurity when it preserves your essence. There is wisdom in walking away from attention when it pulls you away from yourself. Because the more time you spend trying to be seen, the less time you spend becoming someone worth being. The worthy life doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't move to be remembered. It moves because it is right. It walks a narrow path, not because it's glamorous, but because it is good. It is whole, and that wholeness becomes your legacy, even if no one claps. Ask yourself, am I building something real or something presentable? Am I living in accordance with my deepest values or someone else's expectations? If your answer feels uncertain, let that uncertainty wake you. Let it call you back to what's essential. You don't need to start over. You only need to start inward, to return to the foundation, to live, not for an audience, but for alignment. Let others chase applause. Let them craft images. You, return to your rhythm. Return to your roots. Return to the quiet daily work of becoming someone who doesn't need to announce their peace because it's already felt in their presence. This is how a worthy life is built. Not in noise, not in speed, but in stillness, in intention, in acts that may never be seen, but will be felt by everyone you touch. And in the end, you'll know. You didn't just live. You lived well, not loudly, but wisely.